Hello everyone! Something different today. You always know if I'm filming in this spot, something a little zany is gonna happen. Last October, I reviewed The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, and in January or February, I reviewed the 1953 film. On both videos, but especially the first one, I got several comments mentioning a musical version. I had never heard of this before, but those of you who brought it up made it sound very intriguing. So I decided to check it out, and rather than just listening to it on Spotify, I ordered the 2-disc set from the library, crossing my fingers that it would include the booklet with lyrics and especially artwork, because that was something that many people mentioned. Items from the library, especially old ones, don't always have that stuff. It's been lost or stolen, but I lucked out this time and I got the 2-disc set relatively intact. It's a little cracked and one of the discs was rattling inside, and it has the booklet with the artwork. Success! Released in 1978, Jeff Wayne's musical version of The War of the Worlds, that's the full title, is a musical journey through the famous H.G. Wells science fiction novel about a Martian invasion of planet Earth, specifically England. And it does this through narration, spoken dialogue, songs, and instrumental interludes. That I've never heard of it does surprise me, probably as much as it surprises those of you who are big fans of it. I hope you're not dismayed. I am not a stranger to unusual musicals from the 70s and 80s, musicals based on classic literature. The musicals that I listen to the most are on the eclectic side, but to the best of my recollection, this hasn't crossed my path until now. Maybe because it's not a straight musical in the sense that we generally think of musicals, and I'll talk about that in a second. More telling is that my mom, also a fan of musicals, but more to the point, actually a person when this came out, had also never heard of it. Granted, in 1978 she was a bit busy with other things. She had a toddler and another baby on the way, so she wasn't really on top of what was going on in the music scene. But based on some research I've done, while it enjoyed international success, I get the idea that it wasn't quite as big a sensation in the US as it was in the UK, Australia, Germany, and other countries. The album did peak at 98, I think, on the Billboard charts, which is not bad, but it was not the huge hit that it was other places. I feel I'm at a bit of a disadvantage here, knowing that some of my viewers, at least, are much more well-versed in this album than I am, but for anyone interested in hearing what I have to say about this musical version of The War of the Worlds, here are my thoughts on it. Jeff Wayne composed and conducted this combination rock opera, radio theater concept album. It's, like I said, not the type musical production you associate with show tunes and Broadway. It's a scored adaptation of The War of the Worlds, using music, sound effects, and recurring themes to illustrate the action, and a handful of vocalists to express characters' emotions and desires. It's a 90-minute, 2-part experience. It's the kind of thing you put on and lean back and just listen to. It follows the book quite closely. There are changes, characters added, elements abridged, but much of the storyline and script are straight from Wells. If you look it up, you'll see the musical genre listed as progressive rock. Whatever that means. I find progressive rock to be kind of a catch-all term. I think of this music as a little harder to pinpoint than that. It's rock and it's rhythm and instrumentation, but there's also a string orchestra. Lots of synthesizer imitating instruments, synthesizer providing sound effects. There's also the influence, I think, of disco and funk. I don't want to just categorize it as one style. I think it's kind of got a little bit of everything of the time. Hi, it's me. So, I don't listen to much progressive rock, or if I do, I don't know it by that name, so it was with some embarrassment I discovered shortly after filming this video that what I just described is, in fact, partly the very definition of progressive rock. Therefore, that is an accurate categorization after all. Derp. Carry on. Richard Burton plays the central role of the journalist, the narrator, which is an excellent choice given that Burton had one of the greatest voices of his time. He does not sing. I wasn't sure going into this if he would or not. He could have, I think. I quite like his performance as King Arthur on the original Broadway. I think it's the original Broadway cast recording of Lerner and Loewe's Camelot with Julie Andrews and Robert Goulet. But no, Burton only provides spoken narration and dialogue and does a phenomenal job with it, invoking the ominous tone underlying Wells's foreboding exposition. I really enjoyed the narration. The other performers include Justin Hayward, lead singer of the Moody Blues, Julie Covington, who I knew from the original concept recording of Don't Cry For Me, Argentina from Evita, David Essex, who did that song Rock On, didn't know that singer was British, learn something new every day, and he also recorded a single from Evita, Oh What a Circus. Philip Lynott, I hope I'm saying that right, founder and lead singer of Thin Lizzy, and Chris Thompson, lead singer of Manfred Mann's Earth Band. Oh, and guitarist Joe Partridge also provides vocals for The Martians. This is the 1985 CD release, the only thing I was able to get through my library, and along with the libretto, it also includes some wonderful artwork, a total of 7 paintings if you include the Horsell Common painting spread on the first page. Credit for these pictures, which I'm going to try my best to show you, but I might just insert... yeah, sorry, that's not working. Credit for these pictures goes to Peter Goodfellow, Jeff Taylor, and Michael Trim, who have rendered key moments from the story in fanciful, eye-catching ways. I think my favorites are Thunderchild by Michael Trim, The Red Weed by Jeff Taylor, and Brave New World, also by Jeff Taylor. Now, there's a tradition here that when I review an album, I go through the tracks individually and share some comments on each one. So, let's do that. And as is also a tradition, to avoid any copyright issues, I will not be playing any music from the album. I might actually make one exception for that, but for the most part, this will be a musicless musical review, unless it is produced by my own face. Disc 1 is Part 1, The Coming of the Martians. Disc 1, Track 1 is The Eve of the War, which is one of 2 songs that scored very well on the charts, and I think it's one of my favorites. I would say that the first 90 seconds are sufficient to tell you if this musical is going to be to your taste or not. Richard Burton opens with the book's famous first lines, and then the music begins with dramatic strings, and then the 70s kick in. It took me a time or two to get used to this transition and the feel of it, but I like it. And the more I listen to it, the more I feel I don't just like it, I love it. It has harpsichord and synth with a vengeance, and I should mention that there's quite a bit of unique instrumentation on this album. Keyboards, drums, guitars, all that, but also exotic instruments like the zither, the santur, and the tar, all played by George Fenton. Gary Osborne wrote the lyrics for all the songs minus this first track, and he shares writing credit for Forever Autumn with Paul Weigras. Jeff Wayne himself wrote the simple but catchy lyrics from this track, sung by Justin Hayward, which has been rattling in my brain for the last couple days. The chances of anything coming from Mars are 1,000,000 to 1, he said. The chances of anything coming from Mars are 1,000,000 to 1, but still they come. Sound effects are employed to represent a Martian missile being fired off on its way to Earth and to create an eerie, spacey mood. These are noises that have a classic alien connotation, and I bet this would have freaked me out if I had listened to it as a little kid. One track fades into the next very smoothly. Track 2, Horsell Common and the Heat Ray, starts with a building bass guitar riff accompanied by an unscrewing cylinder sound. The journalist describes the Martian body as the sounds get a little freakier, and then the heat ray is represented by a guitar lick that somehow has a rough, metallic sound. I don't know enough about guitars, I hardly know anything about guitars, to figure out how they achieved that or how they made it sound like a chorus of kazoos. I don't mean that as a put down. It has this unique distortion. I don't know any other way to describe it. It sounds like there's a chorus of kazoos. Anyway, this is another catchy composition with a good beat. You can dance to quite a bit of this music, and you quickly pick up on a characteristic of the style, which is a tendency for a certain melodic section to repeat a couple times, and then a new section is introduced, and that repeats a couple times, and then the former melody comes back. Wayne adds depth to the musical storytelling by using leitmotifs to represent certain elements. So while there are lengthy interludes with no narration, you can get an idea of what's supposed to be happening if you have picked up on these leitmotifs. Track 3, The Artilleryman and the Fighting Machine, introduces the Artilleryman, voiced by David Essex, who sounds young, frightened, and in awe, and barely holding it together as he tells Burton's journalist what he's witnessed. This track has the two characters making their way to London and introduces two main differences from the book. One, the journalist is actually a combination of Wells's narrator, the writer-philosopher, and his younger brother, who in the novel participates in the mass exodus from London. The other change is that instead of a wife who has no name, the journalist is trying to catch up to his lover Carrie and her father. When she came up, I was a bit confused, and then I did find it odd that she's mentioned and he has interaction with her, but she has no lines spoken or sung. This track also introduces the famous imagery of the tripods, and following a recurrence of the theme from The Eve of the War, has the first appearance of the Martians' chilling howl Ula, which here is an exultant battle cry.
Emitting deafening howls which roared like thunder.
I don't know how they made this sound effect. Like I said, Joe Partridge is providing the vocals, and it's layered vocals. There's a harmonic element there, but it sounds like there's a filter or a distortion applied to suggest being both biological and mechanical. It's freaky, and the first time I heard it, I thought, what? What is that? But it's cool. This is the running theme of this review is, well, at first I didn't know what to think, and then the more I listened to it, the more I felt like, okay. The next section is Forever Autumn and the Thunder Child. Track 4 is Forever Autumn, a song that became a hit single. It's a melancholy song of lost love, reflecting the journalist's feelings of separation from his girlfriend or fiancé, whatever she is. Of all the songs here, I would call this one the most, not generic, but accessible with regard to the lyrics. This is a song that you can listen to separately, and context isn't important. Your understanding of the song's meaning is not dependent on an understanding of what's going on in the story. But the invasion is continuing as midway through the track we hear the Martian battle cry, Ula, again, followed by a return of the Eve of the War theme. Tracks 4 and 5 really seem to go together, and they're presented that way in the libretto, which does not define where each track begins and ends. That was a bit confusing the first time I was listening to the album and following along here, because I would think, oh, here's where the next song starts, but actually it starts way back here. Track 5 is Thunderchild, and Chris Thompson sings as the voice of the people, telling the story of Thunderchild, the British warship that valiantly faces off against the Martians' fighting machines. It's interesting, as you listen repeatedly, you pick up more things. For example, Burton mentions the heat ray again, or the journalist mentions the heat ray again, and sure enough, there's that guitar solo. And then I start picking up on the cue that precedes the Ula cry. It becomes easier to follow the music and to picture the action in my head with greater understanding of what the cues and the themes are. With the heavy line, "The Earth belonged to the Martians," and a triumphant Ula, the first act ends. Disc 2 is The Earth Under the Martians, and track 1 is The Red Weed, Part 1. In the liner notes, it says The Red Weed and Parson Nathaniel, but those are actually two separate tracks. Like I said, the notes are a little bit confusing. The Red Weed is a spooky, atmospheric track with a mournful melody and a percussive heartbeat accompanying the journalist as he takes in the new vegetation that has smothered the English landscape. There's something dreamy about this, and it reminds me of one of the original tracks from Mannheim Steamroller's Halloween album, if anybody's familiar with that. It gets a little weird with a muffled pseudo-anthemic tune, and then halfway through the music opens up, but only briefly. It's an odd track. There's something pretty about it, but paired with the narration, the music makes the Red Weed sound alive and terrifying. More so than I thought the book did. Track 2, The Spirit of Man, is a half-sung, half-spoken debate between the parson Nathaniel and his wife Beth, played by Philip Lynott and Julie Covington. It's kind of an angsty, desperate duet as the parson is struggling with his faith and his wife is pleading that there must still be something worth living for, or dying for. The parson's portrayed as more than a little out of his mind, as he's gotten the idea that the Martians are not from Mars, but are born out of man's inner evil. They're the demons that were in us all along, waiting for a sign to emerge, and we have no hope against them. The character was in the book, but his wife Beth is an addition, and the interpretation of his character is slightly different. Not plot-wise, but just the characterization. I don't like this track as much as I do some others. I find his vocals a little strained, just not that pleasant to listen to, and the lyrics don't always have the most natural flow. Track 3 is The Red Weed Part 2, which you won't actually find listed in the libretto. It begins halfway through what's marked as the Spirit of Man section. I don't know. There are a couple strange sounds in this one. First, the parson's gasp at the sight of the Martians eating. That startled me. And the sound of the journalist punching him to silence him. That made me laugh. It's not supposed to be humorous, so I felt a little bad about that, but it was just the sound effect. It was so fake. The Red Weed theme seems a bit more peppy in this reiteration, and then the guitar comes back in a key moment with a variation of the heat ray representing now the Martian's claw. It is a bit haunting when the journalist steps outside. There's a more optimistic strain in the music to reflect the beautiful day and the fresh air, but there's a darkness. And then the track ends with a subdued return of the music from Disc 1, Track 2, Horcel Common and the Heat Ray. Track 4, Brave New World, starts abruptly when the journalist happens to run into the artilleryman again. The artilleryman wants to restart civilization and make it better this time by building an underground city. I really like this track. It has this big, foreboding start as the artilleryman starts revealing his vision. It's the closest thing, I would say, to a driving rock song on the album, and I've got it stuck in my head. In a brave new world, with just a handful of men, we'll start all over again, all over again. Brave New World can be a phrase of eye-opening wonder, as in Shakespeare's original coinage in The Tempest, "O brave new world that has such people in it." Or, what I think is the more common association now, it can be a phrase suggesting cynical delusion, as in the title of Aldous Huxley's dystopian classic. There's a twisted optimism to this song. The picture the artilleryman's painting sounds great, but don't be fooled. Like the parson, he's losing his grip on reality. The dark tone that underlies the music gives him away, as does the desperate falsetto in the chorus. He's thriving on a fantasy, as the journalist soon finds out. Track 5 is Dead London, which presents a true apocalyptic picture. It starts with the whistle of wind and the connotation of emptiness and stillness. But the most alarming part of it are the sudden, strangled, stretched out oolahs, the Martians wailing as if in pain. The journalist's loneliness is echoed in this haunting cry that surrounds him until it suddenly cuts off. And the story comes to its conclusion, the eve of the war music comes back once again, and it's just about over, but not quite. Track 6 is the epilogue. It starts with the journalist wrapping things up, there's a cheerful mood and a question about the future, and then, as if in answer to that question, we seem to jump ahead from the late 1890s, when this is set, to present-day 1970s, where man has achieved space travel, and the story ends with a twist and a suggestion of revenge. The more I listen to this, the more I like it. I do think it helps a lot that I like some quirky musicals and I like 70s music. If I wasn't the type person I am, didn't have the tastes I have, chances are I might wrinkle my nose at it and say, "Oh, what have they done to this classic novel? This is dreadful." But that was not the initial reaction I had. I was taken aback in the first couple minutes, and then I was amused, but then my feeling turned to one of pleasant surprise. I definitely don't think it's to everyone's taste, but I find it can grow on you. I like most of the music. I like it more the more familiar I become with it, and I appreciate the entire thing as an unexpectedly good adaptation of the book. It's certainly a creative and thought-provoking work, and it continues to enjoy popularity. I found out there have been tours, anniversary concerts, alternate and expanded versions, staged shows, an immersive experience, and at least 3 video games, all spawning from this puppy. I'm curious to learn just how many of my viewers are familiar with Jeff Wayne's musical version of The War of the Worlds, so you're welcome to share your thoughts on it in the comments below. Whether you fall into that camp, or, like me, you had no idea it existed, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll stay tuned for whatever I come out with next week. Thanks for watching.